I'd like to call this special meeting of the Hampton Bays Water District Commissioners to order on this 5th day of February 2020. Please rise and join us for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Please remain standing. We'll do a brief moment of silence. We just pledged allegiance to the flag and the ideals it stands for, liberty and justice for all. And there are men and women who wear the uniform of our armed services, who bravely protect those freedoms all around the world and here at home. So keeping them in our thoughts and prayers, let's have a moment of silence in their honor. Okay, thank you. Please be seated. Okay. We have a representative from our clerk's office. Kim Otadi is here on behalf of, actually Sunday is here too. Oh, I didn't even see this.
You have the town clerk here too.
And we have the actual
My
town
deputy
clerk.
Kim is wonderful.
And deputy clerk. Sorry,
That's okay.
we have Sunday Shermeyer, our town clerk here. So Sunday, I'd ask you to read the special meeting notice and follow it with a roll call.
Certainly. Members of the town board, special meeting notice, Wednesday, February 5th, 2020 at 7 p.m. Please be advised that the town board, in its capacity as commissioners of the Hampton Bays Water District, will convene a special meeting at the Hampton Bays Community Center, 25 Ponquag Avenue, Hampton Bays, New York, on Wednesday, February 5th, 2020 at 7 p.m. for the purpose of considering the following. Proposed 10-year capital improvement plan for the Hampton Bays Water District presented by D&B Engineers and Architects, PC. Financial impacts of the proposed plan to the Hampton Bays Water District customer presented by the Town Comptroller. Jay Schneiderman, Supervisor, Town of Southampton, dated January 29th, 2020. Supervisor Schneiderman.
Present.
Councilwoman Lofstad.
Here.
Councilman Martell.
Present.
Councilman Bouye.
Here.
Councilman Schiavone.
Present.
All right, so the entire board is here. So before I offer some brief introductory remarks, let me just point out some of the distinguished guests who have joined us today. I mentioned Kim Otadi already. We also have Jim Burke at the end, our town attorney who is here. Ray D'Angelo, the chair of the Hampton Bays CAC. Maria Holtz from the Hampton Bays Civic Association. Bill Merklin, who will be presenting in a little while. Our controller, Len Marchese, is in the back, and he will do an analysis of rates based on the capital projections. We have Rich McEwen, who is the supervisor of the Hampton Bays Water District, and James McEwen, who is the assistant superintendent. James Cappers, sorry. Rich McEwen, James Cappers, apologies, who is the assistant superintendent. And I'm sure there's other people here as well who are representing different organizations. So the town board manages we provide oversight to the utility here in Hampton Bays. It's the only area where we provide water service. Everywhere else is served by either private wells or by Suffolk County Water Authority. The town has maintained for, I guess, nearly a century, a water district in this area. You will see the water towers, easy to see, and water is fundamental. We need it for survival. We drink it, we cook in it, we bathe in it, and our job, providing this oversight, is to make sure that the water that you have is safe to drink. We try to deliver a high-quality water at the lowest price that we can deliver it. We had some issues several years ago with pressure problems, discolored water, emerging contaminants in groundwater, and the town board took a real deep dive into the operations of the Hampton Bays Water District, and we asked for an independent consultant to look at the entire infrastructure and operation and see what was needed and develop a plan not just for 1 or 2 years, but a 10-year capital plan so we would know what to expect, what the rates would likely be over those 10 years. And we hired a company called DeVerca and Bartolucci. We have a company now called H2M, and I don't know if John Collins is here, but John Collins is the representative from that engineering firm, and they work with the management at the Hampton Bays Water District on some of the technical operations. But this was the first real broad overview of all of the infrastructure. We asked them to look at really every aspect, from the tank integrity to pipes to valves to different systems for managing pH. And we hired Bill Merklin from the Verco Bartolucci, and they put together this 10-year capital plan, which I believe we put up on the website if anybody wanted to see it. And today we're going to have a presentation about some of the highlights of that report. It's very thorough, and then we'll after that we will ask the controller to sort of take those figures and translate it into dollars, what it's going to cost the public to pay for these infrastructure improvements. There's nothing in here, I believe, that is sort of optional or extra. There's the basic things for running a modern water system, to maintain the physical plant, so to speak, and provide you with a high-quality, safe drinking water product. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Bill Merklin. I'm going to move, and the town board, we're going to take the seats so we're not blocking you. And then you'll have plenty of time to ask questions, and that's what the professionals are here for, to help answer those questions. Okay.
Good evening, everybody. Can you all hear me? If I speak like this? Okay, great. It's nice to see such a good turnout. It's great to see people interested. And I hope we'll be able to answer all your questions afterwards if I don't already have it in the presentation. So as Jay said, we were retained to do a 10-year capital needs study. But this first slide is to really tell you exactly what does that mean. All of these things are steps in that process. So, the first thing is we look at the condition of the existing facilities. We look at historical maintenance and improvements that were done. We evaluate the capacity of the existing wells. Then we look at historical demands, and we project future demands. Then we looked at the historical water quality. We looked at the distribution system condition. We evaluated the ability of the system to meet current and projected demands. And then we boil all of that into recommended projects, and then we estimate the costs. So outside of that, we're really not doing anything more than that. That's the scope of this work. The Hampton Bays Water District's organized under the town of Southampton, and it's overseen by a board of commissioners that are made up of the town council members. And as Jay said, the day-to-day operations are overseen by the superintendent and the operations staff of the water district. This is just an overview of some of the basic facts and statistics. Population's roughly 15,500 with 7,219 water services, about 100 miles of water mains, 512 hydrants. And here's the important stuff. There's 11 water supply wells located at 5 different facilities. And then there are 3 booster pumps. And there's 3 water storage tanks. And there's also 3 interconnections with the Suffolk County Water District. Water Authority. This map gives you an overview. You can see the 5 facilities there. So we'll talk about the distribution system first. It's kind of made up of 2 sections, if you will. The older section and the newer section. The older section is cast iron water mains. These are unlined pipes that were installed in the 1940s. And the newer section, installed after 1965, that's cement lined ductile iron. That's more of a modern pipe. That's what goes in the ground now when you do new water mains. We did know about some low-pressure areas before we started. The Water District knew about these. So east of Shinnecock Canal, that whole area sometimes experiences low pressure, and then Rampasture Road Peninsula, which is a section of the older water mains. That's the cast iron mains. In addition to those low pressure areas, though, we also have some redundancy issues. And what I mean by that are there's whole sections of the distribution system that are only served by one water main. So if that water main was to break, that whole service area would be out of water until it was fixed. So that's the east side of Shinnecock Canal again. And then we have over on Dune Road, Beach Road, on the other side of the bay, where there's a vulnerable water main, and we're going to talk more about that as we go through this. That is also a redundancy issue. It's only fed by one pipe. We have the interconnections with the Suffolk County Water Authority. In general, though, under normal conditions, the pressures are higher in Hampton Bays, so that if you were to open those connections, the water would flow out instead of in. But if there was a fire and a large demand and the pressures dropped in the Hampton Bays Water District, those interconnections could help you to fight a fire, especially on the east side of the Shinnecock Canal. So this is the analysis of capacity versus demand. So right now, with the existing conditions, we went back, we looked historically over, I think about 10 years of data, and we saw that the maximum day over that period of time, the wells pumped about 8.5 million gallons in a day. So that's in the summertime, typically, when people are irrigating and using a lot of water. Right now, the capacity of all the wells that are operating today is 10.1 million gallons per day. So it's more than the historical peak. But the health department, the New York State Department of Health sanitary code says you should be able to meet your maximum day demand with your largest well not operating. So that's what this next line is. The capacity of the current system with the largest well out of service is 8.7. So you can see it's just a little bit more than that maximum day. So that's acceptable. When we projected the demands out to 2030, so this is a 10-year study, so we went out to 2030 and looked at those demands. We estimate that the maximum day could go up to about 8.9. We don't know exactly when that would happen. That's going to depend on a lot of variables. But at some point in the next 10 years, you could see the demands exceed that existing capacity of 8.7 million gallons per day. Only by a little bit, 0.2 million gallons per day. So we'll talk about that towards the end. What would you do to solve that problem? And as far as fire demands are concerned, we do have areas of low pressure as a result of a fire demand during a maximum day. And those are the same two places I mentioned earlier, east of Shinnecock and in the Rampasture area. The district has 3 water storage tanks. These are all elevated tanks. The first one, we call it Tower 1, located on Ponquag Avenue, which is right over here. Constructed in 1967. It was last rehabilitated in 2002. And we're recommending on that tank to be rehabilitated again with about 3 years or so. Tower 2, which is the same capacity, located on Old Riverhead Road, was built in 1985. It was last rehabilitated in 2003, so that tank also needs to be rehabilitated again in the near future, the next few years. Tower 3, which is the largest tank, 1 million gallons, significantly bigger, on Bellow Pond Road, was constructed in 2005. That's a very new tank, but given that these coatings typically last, say, 15 to 20 years at the most, we're looking at a rehabilitation on that tank in the very near future. One of the things about these recommendations, I would say in the next couple of years that what will happen is the Water District will do a full tank condition assessment of each one of these and figure out which order to do them in. So until that's done, we don't know for sure what the priority is in terms of you do one each year, say, for a 3-year period. The Water District had an existing computer model, a hydraulic model of the distribution system. And that allows you to simulate different conditions and identify problems. And then you can use the model to come up with potential solutions to those problems. So we used that model to take a look at things. The first thing we did was said, well, let's look at that historical maximum day condition and see what the model does compared to what we know is true. And we found that those low pressure areas show up as low pressure areas in the model. So that makes sense. Tells you that the model's pretty accurate. So we used it then to say, well, how could you solve those problems? So one of the solutions to solve the the east side of Shinnecock Canal problem would be to add a second water main. So that solves both the redundancy issue and also helps solve the pressure issue. We did look at other alternatives, but that was the best one and the one that we recommended. And then those water mains on Ram Pasture Road Peninsula that I said, those are the older ones, those are the cast iron mains. A lot of those have decreased in diameter due to corrosion. And actually, H2M engineers did an evaluation of that and provided us that information. And the model, again, corroborates it. So we made some recommendations for replacing water mains in that area, which should improve the pressure conditions. One of the other things we look at is just to see whether the existing storage tanks have adequate capacity. On that maximum day, if you have the wells running continuously, the tanks help to feed the excess demand during the peak hours of that day, and then the wells refill the tanks during the lower demand hours of that day. And the model did confirm that those tanks are adequate in terms of volume. So we went around and we looked at every facility and we did a condition assessment looking at things like the buildings and the equipment, the age of the equipment, the wells, the pumps, the chemical feed equipment, and just the buildings themselves. And these next few slides just talk about things that we identified as potential items to go into a capital improvement program. Facility 1, located on Ponquag Avenue. We're recommending a portable generator receptacle be relocated. This just allows a portable generator to be plugged in easily outside in the event of a power failure. Recently at this site there was some GAC filters installed for the removal of PFAS, and we'll talk a little more about that later. But those filters right now are outside, which means they can't be operated in the winter, they're drained down. So a building enclosure for those treatment vessels would make this facility a year-round facility instead of just a seasonal facility. At facility number 2, located on Old Riverhead Road, same idea about the generator receptacles. Here also the motor control centers. This is the electrical equipment that receives electrical power from PSEG and then distributes it to the equipment on the site. We're recommending that those be replaced at this site. They've reached the end of their useful life. The next item is just a minor item to install some check valves. And then also at this site, we're recommending an emergency generator and an automatic transfer switch so that the booster pumps at this facility can be operated in the event of a power outage. Facility 3, located on Bellows Pond Road, south of Sunrise Highway. We're recommending an emergency generator at this site. A new chemical treatment building. The existing chemicals are located in each of the separate buildings and are a little bit tight quarters, so this would make it a safer operation for the operators. We're also talking about replacing the electrical equipment at this site. Facility 4, Bellows Pond Road, north of Sunrise Highway. An iron and manganese treatment plant is recommended. This, in fact, is already being designed by another engineering firm. We're also recommending some chemical equipment improvements. Facility 5 on Jones Road is a very new facility. We have no recommendations at that site. It's really, everything is good there because it's new. The next step in this process, we did a water quality review. So this has sort of two parts to it. One is we looked at the historical water quality samples that the Water District collects on a routine basis, but we also looked, we hired a third-party company to do a radius search for known contamination sites within a 2-mile radius of each well, just to see if there is anything that we need to worry about that's not already being detected in the well. So this is a summary of what we found. At Facility 1, this is the location where those GAC filters have been installed recently, and those GAC filters are there to remove a contaminant known as PFAS. And the source of those contaminants is a New York State DEC Superfund site. And it's about 630 feet north and up gradient of the well site. So that site has impacted these wells, but that treatment equipment is already there and already removing those contaminants to non-detectable levels. Also at this site, we're seeing some elevated chloride concentrations. This could be from saltwater intrusion, or it could also be from road salt storage, some sort of historical infiltration from road salt storage. And so we don't know the answer to that, but we do know that it's a concern. Specifically at well 1, we have this contaminant called PFOS. These are long, hard to pronounce chemical compounds, but recently the New York State Department of Health has proposed regulations for these compounds. So PFOA and PFOS, which are both in the family of let's give it a generic term, PFAS. So these two chemicals are proposed to have new regulations go into effect that could be as early as May 2020, but the district's actually been proactive and the treatment's already in place. Also at this site, at well number 1-2, we have some elevated levels of iron and manganese. The district has been using a sequestering agent to address that, and it seems to be effective. There's some elevated nitrate concentrations in well 1-2. To address that, the district already has in place a blending interlock. So that is, basically what that means is well 1-2 can't run unless another well with lower nitrates is running also, so that the net result is a lower concentration going out into the system. And well 1-3, as I said earlier, PFOS contamination effectively being treated by the GAC filters. Facility 2, we did not find any potential contamination sources on the list of known contamination sites within a 2-mile radius. We didn't see any historical contaminants of concern in the water quality data on well 2-1, but on well 2-2 we have also seen some elevated chloride levels. These are still well below the allowable levels, but they are higher than you would expect or that you would want. Facility 3, Bellows Pond Road, south of Sunrise Highway. Same thing, no known potential sources of contamination. So that, well 3-1, we didn't see any contaminants of concern in the historical data from that well. But at well 3-2, we did see some low levels of PFNA, which is one of those compounds that falls under that umbrella of PFAS. This is currently not a regulated compound in the State Department of Health, nor is it currently being considered. So we don't have an issue in terms of a regulatory requirement, but even if we did, it would most likely be similar to the regulations that are being proposed for the other contaminants, and the levels that were detected are below that level. So treatment would not be required, even if it was regulated. Iron and manganese at well 3-2 effectively being sequestered to control the precipitation. And then at well 3-3, the same thing with the PFNA at very low levels. Facility 4 at Bellows Pond Road, no known potential contamination sources within a 2-mile radius. Iron and manganese here are relatively high compared to all of the other facilities, to the point where the sequestration process was not adequate to control precipitation. So at this facility, an iron and manganese treatment plant is currently being designed and will soon be under construction. Facility 5 at Jones Road, no known contamination sources and no historical contaminants of concern. So some of this will sound a bit repetitious because this is the list of recommended improvements. The handout that I gave all of you today is Table 7-1 from our report, which summarizes all of these same projects and identifies the cost associated with each one. So if you look at that table, I know there's a lot of numbers and it's kind of hard to look at all at once, but the first column after the list of jobs is the estimated cost in 2020. If you didn't get one, there's a few over at the desk over there. Sorry about that. So the first column is the estimated cost if you were to do the job in 2020. But the subsequent columns as you go to the right are estimated costs for each of the next 10 years. And if there's a number in that column, that means that's the year we're recommending the project to be done, and it's been escalated to account for inflation. So if you go all the way over to the right column on the table, that's the total cost for that project after inflation. The number on the bottom right is the total cost of all the recommended projects. We broke it into two categories, the first 5 years and the second 5 years. And so all that's in the table, and if you have questions, we can do that at the end of the presentation. So just a quick summary, because I've said it already. Facility 1, generator receptacles, a building over the GAC filter. Facility 2, generator receptacles, electrical upgrades, booster pump, check valves, and a generator. Facility 3, generator, chemical building, electrical equipment replacement. Facility 4, an iron and manganese treatment plant, and chemical room improvements. So in addition to those things, as I mentioned earlier, we think that there'll be potentially a shortfall in capacity from a code compliance point of view at some point in the next 10 years. So we're recommending that a new well be installed. Exactly where is out of the scope of this analysis, but we're just saying you need to look. So I would think that one of the first things the district would do is embark on an evaluation of exactly where you would put that and what size well you would want to build. Security improvements at all the facilities, really just an electronic access control system. Some distribution system improvements. So that's the Shinnecock Bay crossing at the Ponquag Bridge, the redundant water main crossing the Shinnecock Canal, and the replacement of the undersized water mains at Ram Pasture Road Peninsula. And then the water storage tank rehabilitations. The last thing on the list is a meter replacement program. That's something the district's already got underway, and we're just including it on the list as a capital project. So the total cost for the first 5 years is just over $25 million, and then for the next 5 years, just over $9 million. And as I said, that table that I handed out, Table 7-1, has all the details on that. So then we can move to questions.
Can we maybe, before we do,
Yes?
is it possible, can we get Len to do this presentation?
Absolutely.
So we can translate into rates, and then you'll be able to ask questions to Mr. Merkley or Mr. Marchese or the board itself.
Okay, so just a quick overview of where we are. The way the finances work in the Hampton Bays District is we collect both fees for the water service and taxes. So your bill is basically made up of two components. You get a usage bill, and you also get a line item in your tax bill includes an amount for real property taxes that goes to cover. So it's a combination of the two. So often there's a little bit of confusion when you try to compare our rates with those of, like, say, Suffolk County Water Authority, because they're not comparable unless you add the two together. The Water Authority just charges everything in a rate. So it's important to know that you have to add both of them to get to the total costs. Okay, so what we did was, based on the numbers that DeVerker and Bartolucci put together, we wanted to say, well, what would that cost to pay for this? Obviously, it's a lot of money. It's not cheap. The way we ran an analysis was we were going to pay for most of the capital improvements in the rates. And the operating expenses, or the increase in operating cost over this lifetime, would be continue to be paid with the real estate taxes, and then so the total bill would increase proportionally. So you would have both rate increases and property tax increases. So what this chart kind of says is it's pulling the numbers from that spreadsheet that they did. So this year, the board has already authorized the initial phase of this, because there's projects that are kind of critical that we need to undertake right away. So they have currently authorized $6,355,000 in bonds. And then the rest of these numbers kind of flow with the schedule and when it happens. So, for instance, in 2021, and the way it works with bonds, just to real try to keep it kind of simple, is that when you borrow money, you don't have to make a payment until the next year. So that's why there's a delay in the effect. It's you borrow money today, our first payment isn't until next year. So as a result, the first $6,355,000, in order to cover that cost, we would need to raise rates 26.84% in 21 in order to bring in enough revenue to pay the debt service, the repayment of the bonds, the interest and principal over the next year. And these are 15-year bonds. So as you continue to borrow more and more money, the rates have to continually be increased depending on the bond from the prior year. So in the center column, it's the current year's increase, and all the way to the right is the cumulative increase that we have to do in rates in order to cover all of the borrowed money to pay for the bonds. Okay, that's just the basic financing of how we would propose paying for this 10-year capital plan. Okay, so the second component of the way we pay, of what the costs are in the district, are operating expenses. So part of their analysis also indicated that in addition to the current money that we need, we also need additional operating money, cash money, on a regular basis, not in capital expenditures, but also operating expenses to run the district. So what this schedule does is it kind of takes our current expenses, increases it appropriately, and then basically brings it forward with a 3% increase in the cost of living over the next 10 years. And that's how you see the rates have to fluctuate. There's a large jump in year one, and then it kind of levels out as it moves forward. Okay, so what does this mean for the average homeowner? Okay, so it's at 26%. The average homeowner right now, with a 26% increase, their bill is currently about $286. What we did is we took all of the homes and we kind of divided it by the amount of users, and we got an average amount. And so that represents the current average bill is about $286, right? So if you were to increase that by 26% in year one, the average person would see a $77 increase in their taxes, in their rates, I'm sorry. So as you move along, you can see every year the rates would be increasing, therefore the average water bill would be increasing. So that by the end of 2030, the average water bill would be $669, or an overall average increase of $382 over 10 years for the capital. So then also the second component again is the operating cost. So that's the capital cost, the operating cost. So right now we currently bring in $1,077,000 in real property taxes, all of the tax bills. So when you look at the average home, a $500,000 assessed home, I just use that number, wherever the average is, I'm not really sure, but you can compare that to what your house is assessed at. At $500,000, the average tax bill for the district, nothing else, is $131. As it goes up throughout the years, the tax portion of your bill will have to be increased from 2020 to 2030 to $213.05. So the average tax bill for the district alone would go up $81.75 for the 10-year plan. Okay, so the average, this slide shows the average annual water bill for each, and then the average taxes for each. So, again, your water bill is, the way we pay for water is in the water bill and in the tax bill. So you can see here that the overall average is increasing in the first year. Your average combined bill is $418, and your average combined bill at the end of a 10-year period is $882. So the average increase is $123 and $464. And that's it. It's kind of a lot of numbers, and but the gist is that if we borrow $35 million, it has to be paid back over roughly, this will continue because the bonds are 15-year bonds. Even though this is a 10-year plan, it doesn't mean that after year 30, the bills drop off, because the bonding is always considered 15 years from when you bond it. So there'll be continuously projects. So that is what the base load would be, and then obviously as that time comes by, there'll be other projects that will be needed to be funded and purchased. And we can go from here, so.
The bonding, I mean, would we be borrowing 35 million right at the outset, wouldn't we? But the way you mentioned it, year to year. And what interest rate would we be paying, Jay? Thank God interest rates are so low in this regard, but are we borrowing at all?
I can answer that. Okay. No, what we're doing is we're borrowing it, a lot of it, of this plan, as it says, let's see if I can go back. On this slide, the year on the left represents the year that we would borrow the money. So this year, in 2020, we're going to borrow $6,355,000.
So, sorry then, how can you forecast out? Interest rates are at historic lows now. How can you forecast out what interest rates are going to be in 2027 or whatever, any year?
That's a good question. That's a good question. These rates, the rates that we used in our analysis were 4%. Right now, the town borrows less than that. We borrow in the area of 2.5%. So we're building in you're right, it could be higher.
It's an unknown then.
Well, we have to use an estimate, otherwise, you can't make any projections. So we're using 4%, which is very conservative.
Why don't we bond all? So like, I was on a school board. A school district wants to build a facility, they bond it all. They don't bond it year by year. So I'm sorry, I see several people from the town board here. Why wouldn't the town bond the 35 million estimated cost? And we have a known expense, especially given interest rates. You're saying right now the town would borrow at 2.5%? We're not going to beat that.
So it's true that we have very low interest rates. We're in a low interest rate environment, and we are a AAA rated town. All these projects, though, you couldn't possibly do them all next year. Even if you wanted to, they take a lot of time to design, and you'd be basically paying interest on money that was just sitting there, and you never know. They could go up, the interest rates. They could go down. It's possible. All we can do is forecast, and that's what we do in budgeting. We do our best estimate of what it would be, and I think that's fairly conservative to use 4%.
I don't. Who knows? 4%?
Well, you think they're going to be higher or lower? They could be.
People here are in a similar general demographic as I am. We know what interest rates are. This is historic. Come on. It was 20% when Carter was president. Come on. They could be 8% is not,
Okay, another question, man?
I have a couple for the engineer and a couple for...
Sure.
Is that okay? Okay. I'll start with, you talked about salt intrusion and the well depths, and I read through the report, and you talked about the aquifers. Is there any possibility of going to a different aquifer?
That's a good question. The answer is no, because the New York State DEC would not allow you to drill a well deeper to avoid contamination, because they're concerned that you would draw that contamination down into the deeper level.
Okay, thank you. And then you talked about Facility 3 may have contamination. Why wouldn't we be proactive and put a GAC treatment there?
Well, it's contaminated, contamination sounds so bad. There's low levels of a contaminant that is currently unregulated. And even if it was regulated, it would likely, and I'm speculating, but it would likely be regulated at 10 parts per trillion, which is the same regulation that's currently proposed for PFOA and PFOS, and the levels we're seeing are significantly below that. So you wouldn't put treatment in for that.
Sorry. It seems like that contamination is occurring and it could happen at that facility. Wouldn't we want to put that sort of in the plan? That's just that we might have to put treatment there.
Right. So the water district monitors for this contaminants, for all of these contaminants, on a monthly basis. So if you're going to see an increasing level over time, then that would be a project that the district would have to look at. But you can't predict that now, and until that happens, it wouldn't make sense to do something about it.
Okay. So we're going with a true engineer. So okay, because I'm an engineer also. And then I think this has to do with you talked about operating cost. You didn't put costs in the plan, but you talked about $6 million for projects that are underway. I'm wondering what those are, the $6 million. And then you talked about a large jump in year one of $3 million for operating, and I'm wondering what that is also.
The 6.3 million, we have our folks here from the water, I'd like one of them to detail, they can detail the current projects. It wasn't 3 million, it was 300,000 extra right up front. And then it's our normal increases, 3% a year for the next
Let me
10 years.
just take the current borrowing piece of it. So this roughly $6 million, so the tank at Field 4, that third tank that was mentioned, is delaminating. The coatings are peeling and exposing some of the metal, particularly on the inside of the tank. It really should not wait. We have the H2M, who has done those periodic tank reviews, has said that needs to be done ASAP. So that is half that cost. And then the iron manganese filtration is the other. So that field, which is some of the best water in terms of, it's positioned by Sears Bellows. It's in a Pine Barrens area, a protected aquifer area, but does have high iron and manganese. Not particularly a health concern as much as an aesthetic concern. But the state regulations say that once you go kind of a combined level of iron and manganese beyond 1 milligram per liter, they don't really want you to continue to sequester. Sequestering sort of keeps it in suspension. So if you can't sequester, then you're going to get discolored laundry, you're going to get discolored water you're not going to want to bathe in or drink. We can't run this system without that field. There's a lot of volume that's coming off of that field. So if we don't do something to start pulling that iron and manganese out, we won't be able to use that field, and that will be a very big problem for the Hampton Bays Water District.
Okay.
Did you guys want to add anything to that, or did I cover it okay? Okay.
Okay. And I forgot, there was one, you brushed past lead testing in the report. I'm wondering if there is going to be lead testing done soon for the schools.
I'm going to let Bill answer that too.
Well, I don't know what's going to happen in the schools, but in the scope of our study, we're not looking so much at the schools. We're looking at the distribution system and the water services. So distribution system usually doesn't have that, but the water services could have it. particularly the older ones, where either the whole service could be lead, or sometimes just they have like a flexible piece where you connect to the main. We call it a gooseneck. But in this case, there just isn't any data available to determine whether these lead services exist or not.
The question is, is that going to happen? Are we going to look for or get some data?
Just as an answer to your question, the Hampton Bays Water District, there is no lead piping or any lead connections in this water district. The lead and copper rule, I believe it was actually of 1985. It goes back to before I started here, that we had been, I guess, we don't have any lead and copper, so we passed the lead and copper rules and stuff, so they don't, it's not an issue.
I can maybe elaborate on that a little.
Yeah, yeah.
What he's
Yeah, just
referring
that-
to
because
is the district's required to collect water quality samples from faucets at different locations throughout the service area. And then there's a statistical analysis done to determine if anything over the 90th percentile exceeds a certain number. And I think what he's saying is that hasn't happened. So if there is lead, it's not showing up in the samples.
Okay, so then so what you're saying is that there's no data because it didn't show up in the samples, but the sampling's been done. So I'm just wondering where that data is.
Well, that data exists, the
Okay.
district has that.
Yeah.
Well, I think what I'm saying, though, is we don't have historical records that say this type of pipe was installed at house number 1. So what he's saying is, even though we don't have that, we do know that we don't have a problem because it's not showing up in the water quality samples.
Okay, thank you.
Well, can I ask, just because we're keeping minutes on these meetings, if you could just state your name? And those speakers who spoke before, if you could just let the clerk know your full first and last name.
Regina Axelrod, and I want to say I've lived in Hampton Bays 30 years, but now I'm a full-time resident, and I'm really happy to have this opportunity to meet with everybody in the community to discuss this problem, and I'm impressed. I would like to know PFOS and PFOA. I know the EPA doesn't have standards for it, and unlikely to have standards for it in this in the next few years. Will New York? So you saying New York State has its own standards? I have two questions. If EPA does ever have standards, which ones will supersede the other? And the second question is, how do you know that the filtration system that you are using is actually dealing with these two contaminants? Because I understood that it's very difficult to get them out of the water.
Okay.
And then I have another question.
So the answer is that EPA has what they call an action level currently, which is a much higher number than what the New York State Department of Health is proposing. So to be clear, the State Department of Health has a draft regulation that has not yet been implemented, but is likely to be implemented in the very near future. The other question was, how do you know that it's not showing up, right?
How do you know it's working?
So we can sample, the detection level for this contaminant is very low. It's in the single digits of parts per trillion. And to put that in perspective, a part per trillion is 1 second in 32,000 years. So we're talking about a very, very small number. The proposed regulation is 10 parts per trillion. So that's 1 second in 3,200 years. The sampling tells you the answer. So when you see, let's say you have 11 or 12 coming out of the raw water from the well, the water district collects samples from the untreated water, and then they collect samples from the treated water, and it's non-detectable on the treated side.
Okay, so
Can I just add one thing to that, too? So we are, so the state recommended is 70 parts per trillion. But the new standard that may come out would be a mandate at 10 parts per trillion, so it's much lower, and it would switch from a recommendation to a mandate. And they require us currently to test once every quarter, so 4 times a year. But we on our own have decided that we would test every single month, so that we'd have a much, so we could respond much quicker if there's any changes. So again, we're checking the water coming out of the ground, but we're also checking the water coming out of that filter that you talked about, because at some point it will lose its effectiveness, and all the little receptacles in it that capture these chemicals will be full, and it'll start spilling out, and we don't want that to happen. So as soon as we start seeing some changes, we'll have to shut it down and purge that filter, clean it out, replace the medium, and then start again.
Yeah, because these are dangerous pollutants. I have another question, just a small one. You said the pipes in the ram pasture area are corroded. And I was just wondering, how does that happen? Because in my house, I've discovered I have corroded pipes, and it's a brand-new house.
So there are different kinds of pipes in your house versus what's in the road in the ram pasture area. In ram pasture, they're unlined cast iron pipes. So the more modern pipes they're lined with a cement lining, which protects the metal from exposure to the water that causes it to corrode. So cast iron, when it corrodes, it tuberculates, so it sort of expands, and the pipes neck down, so that the effective area of the pipe becomes smaller, and that's why we're seeing pressure problems. Sometimes you can see iron, discolored water as a result of that as well, but I don't think we're seeing that here. We're just seeing the lower pressure problems.
I have another question, and I don't know if this is the appropriate time to bring it up, but for some people, the additional estimated costs are or will be a burden. I was just wondering, is there going to be an opportunity to discuss in the future the Hampton Bays Water District joining the Suffolk County Water District? I knew it was a question that came up in the past. Is there going to be an opportunity to discuss that again? Thank you.
I'll try to field that one.
I'm sorry.
So, part of the reason we did this exercise is so we would understand what the cost of keeping it local would be. So a lot of people love the fact that we have a local utility and want to keep it local, but there's a cost, obviously, to keeping it local. When Suffolk County Water Authority came in the last time, they were proposing to take over the capital expenses and provide some rate stability by spreading those costs over their 1 million customers rather than just the 7,000 customers in Hampton Bays. It's still potentially an option. We're going ahead and spending the $6 million because we feel like we can't wait, but that does give us an opportunity. If Suffolk County Water Authority is interested, and I don't know that they still are, but they've been provided with this 10-year capital plan. They know what they're getting into now too. That is a conversation we certainly can have. I have to wrestle as a water district commissioner. I feel like I have a fiduciary responsibility. If I'm going to burden you with $30 million in debt that somebody else is willing to pay, do you get that choice? So you may have to make a decision. What is the best path for the future of Hampton Bays? Is it through bringing in an outside management? And we looked at that once. We discussed it and said everybody would keep their jobs. There's all kinds of issues with that. We will not, if we go to look at that, there would be no transition without a public vote. There would be a full public vote. It would be up to the people of Hampton Bays to decide that. What we're doing here today is just simply saying, what is it going to take to bring this water district up to the correct standard of operation? As I said earlier, I don't think any of the capital projects are extras. They're just the basic things that this district needs to be able to operate so that we can deliver quality water to all the residents of Hampton Bays. So yeah, we probably will, I suspect we will have that conversation again as people wrestle with the costs. Within a 5-year period or so, the costs for water are going to double. Now some people might have a problem with that. Other people might say, yeah, I'm happy to pay more. I'm happy to pay more to keep it local. And you'd also have to ask Suffolk Water Authority, now that they know about all these projects, what would the rates be with them? They might double with Suffolk County Water Authority as well. I don't know. They'd have to come back and re-review it and give us a proposal.
It's not only the cost, but I'm thinking of a larger district. We can profit from the technology or the expertise with a greater whole, in addition to what you brought up, sharing the cost over a wider number of customers. So I'm just thinking we might benefit. Sometimes keeping something local insulates us from a better opportunity. I just want to raise that question.
No, I appreciate that. And, you know, debating the pros and cons of the larger district versus the smaller district is, I think, a conversation for another night. Tonight, we're just talking about what the needs of the district are and what the cost would be to meet those needs. More questions? Sure, Mark.
Yes, my name is Mark Schiffer, and I have properties in the 4 facilities that you mentioned. And I think it's a great study that you did. I mean, I think it's very thorough, and I think the meeting like tonight is a very positive one. But I think that here we are being asked to double the rates, or more than double the rates in Hampton Bays. And Hampton Bays, I feel, is being really singled out in a way that I do not see that singled out anywhere else in Southampton. And the cost base to live in Hampton Bays keep on going up. And I was wondering whether maybe you could try to find other sources of funds to fund that. You know, it's a major endeavor, $34 million, other sources of funds than just our own community, our own small community, our own workforce community. You know, we are, a community made up of the people who work in Southampton, who are the lifeblood of Southampton, and to ask us to pay for, to treat our water that was polluted by others for, I think maybe I would like to ask the town maybe to look into other sources of funding.
Mark, that's a great point. That's a terrific point, and there are grants available. The state's made a lot of money available for water quality projects, and we certainly apply for grants to do that. We do have a lawsuit against the manufacturers of these polyfluorinated, perfluorinated compounds, so we're hoping to get some money back for that. Of course, wherever we can get grants and have others pay, of course, we will try to do that. So this is sort of a worst-case scenario if we're not able to get grants. It will only get better if we're able to get grants. And we have great grant writers, and we've been pretty successful. That GAC filter, that was over $1 million, but about half of the cost, but $700,000 plus was paid for with grant money. And we just did some water mains in East Quogue. We got $1 million from the state toward that. It was a $4 million project, but it's about a quarter of the cost. So we're going to certainly try to get grant money to help offset these costs so that the people in Hampton Bays don't have to shoulder that burden. I saw some, Gail?
Obstacle course, yeah. I don't want to damage anybody's computer here on top of it. So the question I have is that there's a 10-year, I don't know if you could hear me, there's a 10-year build-out. So I'm just curious, is that a build-out just based on organic use, or is it related to like the Hampton Bays Overlay District and subdivisions that are on?
Well, first, the scope of the project is just a 10-year scope. So that's like somewhat of an arbitrary number, the 10 years. The overlay district was looked at in the demand projections and included in those projections.
Thank you very much.
Mark Hansen, not sure if it's really a question or a comment, but looking at the capital plan, there's like $3.2 million for the Shinnecock Bay Crossing, which really serves a beach pavilion, 2 restaurants, and a few commercial facilities. Seems a disappropriate amount of money to spend to benefit a relatively small group of businesses. So I guess just a question, is there an alternative? Or what's the obligation to really do that work?
Well, all I can say in that regard is I understand your point. The water district, however, is obligated to provide water to the service area, so they're kind of stuck in a way. And this particular installation is very costly because it's, what we're looking at is a directional drilling project for, I think it's about 1,500 or 1,700 feet under the bay. So it is a costly project.
I think we're going to study different ways, different approaches, and see what's the most cost-effective. The area is an important area economically. We have the beach pavilion. There's, the entire community uses that beach pavilion. If you didn't have a restroom there, I mean, you need water, right, to have it. You have a commercial dock there, second largest commercial fishing fleet in the state. You have a business that produces ice in that area, or is going to produce ice, a fish packing, and you have Oaklands, you have Sundays, and then you also eventually have the Hampton Lady, that nightclub, and restaurant will eventually reopen. So I think, there is a big commercial element to that road. I don't think we have the option of just disconnecting them, and I don't think they could provide, just put a well in to, I don't think it's an option. So we've tried not to abandon that area, as you know. We've been pretty busy over the course of the fall and winter trying to prevent a breach in that area. And federal government's about to spend about $11 million building up that beach there. So a lot of money has gone into that area. But it is an important barrier island, and I think from a commerce perspective, it's an important area to Hampton Bays. Lots of jobs, in the fishing fleet and those restaurants. So I don't think we have a choice, but we can look for less expensive ways to handle the water provision. It's particularly frustrating because we just had the pipe break, as you may know, the one that runs along the bottom of Shinnecock Bay, seems to have been hit by a passing vessel, and it cost us a fortune to put it back together. And I think there's only one operating business right now. I think Sundays is open. I think that may be it in Oakland's occasionally, but we had to provide water, and the bill was quite large for that. Scuba divers down there trying to fix a water main. It was pretty challenging. Laura?
And then you, Ray. Hi, Laura Smith. I want to thank the town board, first of all, for doing this study. It's long past due, and it's not your fault. It's been ignored for a long time. So I think it's great that we're having this opportunity to come together as a community and look at what needs to be done to protect our water. Talking about the Dune Road portion, I think the rest of Dune Road is serviced by Suffolk County Water Authority. It seems like that would be the sensible extension of maybe compromising with Suffolk County taking over that section, and that would save us some money. Then I have another question.
So we did look at that.
Oh, okay.
It's 17,000 feet away, the Suffolk County Water Authority.
So that's more expensive than doing the directional drilling?
Well, here's the issue. If you did that, you would have to permanently purchase water from Suffolk County, and it would still be a redundancy issue, a dead-end line. And if you didn't use the line regularly, you'd have 17,000 feet of stagnant water. It would likely be a bacteriological problem the day you decided to use it.
And how do we prevent that with it being Hampton Bays water? They
Well,
just shut it down?
it's being used. Yeah, and in the winter they circulate the water to keep it moving.
Thank you. And my next question is, the projects that are outlined, are they prioritized? Are they ranked in any way, or they're just all going to be done?
Yeah, that table, if you look at each year, there's costs in each of the years. So that's the list, that's the order that they should happen in.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm Ray D'Angelo from Hampton Bays. I'm a resident of Hampton Bays. I also drink and bathe and cook in this water. And I'd just like to speak about, let me just back up here for a second. If you would, perfluorinated compounds, which is PFNA, PFOAs, and PFOSs. The PFOAs and the PFOSs are regulated by the EPA. This 70 parts per trillion. That's a 1 with 12 zeros. The health department wants to lower that to 10 parts per trillion. And unfortunately, I have a long-term relationship with this stuff. In the early 70s, I was a Johnny firefighter in the Bronx, and we used this to make firefighting foam and in 2.5 gallon extinguishers. And we used to use I think 2 ounces of it and put it in a 2.5 gallon fire extinguisher. And it was very effective for pit fires because in the city, it's a heavier oil and they have to preheat it. And all this, it's in a pit and it always would get out and we'd have a real good hot fire. And this stuff flowed over it and extinguished it. It was very effective. And when we were doing it, we were told, oh, this stuff is great. It's potable water. You can drink it. Well, none of us ever drank it, but we were all having, I get contacted by attorneys all the time. Thank God I'm knocking on wood. I have not developed any cancers, but I get notices all the time to join lawsuits against 3M, which is the manufacturer of this stuff. So this is a very serious health problem. I want to impress that on everybody. We have a Superfund site at the firehouse. I was in contact with the DEC today, and it's testing out at 2,500 particles per trillion, which is 250 times the new proposed limit of 10 parts per trillion. And in my reading, I get stuff on this. Many people in Canada, they intend to lower it to 2 parts per trillion. And some people, advocates, wanted to make 1 part per trillion, because this is really, really a destructive thing in your body, especially for developmental, especially for children. So I just want to keep this whole discussion within that frame of how serious this problem is. And my question is about Facility 1, being that it's only 600 feet away from the firehouse, which is the epicenter of this problem, and also it has a chloride problem. Would you recommend that these facilities be mothballed or maybe only used in the summer to also, reduce the saltwater infusion and also preserve the GAC units, because it's very expensive, these filters? In other words, like, just leave them in reserve and only use these things in the summer. And in that case, we wouldn't have to build buildings over it because we only would be using them in the summer. And I'd just like to hear your answer on that, and I have another question.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point, and in fact, that's something we have been talking to the Water District about. I think it's a question that you have to look at the whole bigger picture before you make that decision, but definitely it would be worth talking about.
And this is the other one I was asking you about, and I'm pretty sure I'm accurate, but, 3-3, and that's at the, Site 3 is where, it's Sears Burroughs. Okay, well, you wrote the reply, I thought you might know, but okay. It's Sears Bellows. Okay. And it tested out in 2017 at 57 parts per trillion of, I can't pronounce that, I think it's it's one of the contaminants. It's not the one that's regulated. And my question, I'm just curious, in 2018 and 2019, it's blank. Like, it didn't test out at all. So I'm wondering why, this stuff, they call it forever chemicals, because they do not break down. They do not break down in the ground. They might break down at ultraviolet light if the sun hit it, but of course it's protected from that in the ground. And my question is, why, like in 2018 and 2019, the same well doesn't show anything? I mean, can that be explained, or? All right, one other question now. Just one other question. In that, the company you hired that went around and found locations of possible pollution within 2 miles radius of it, of the dwell. Well, that facility is only about 6,000 feet away from our landfill, a former dump, which is now the transfer station, where we have a big composting operation. And also, there's another training facility there for the fire department. And I noticed in your, they listed all possible contaminants. That was not picked up. Can you explain why that wasn't picked up?
Most likely, the answer is because the database did not include known contaminants of concern at those locations. So even though it's a landfill, if there's no data that suggests that specific contaminants are in it, it wouldn't show up in the search. It's just looking at numbers. It's not anything more than that.
Maybe we should have more testing of it, because that process generates iron and magnesium, if nothing else, which also affects these filters. So I think that you might want to look at that facility over there. Like I said, and one other thing, I spoke to the DEC this morning, the project manager on this, and the problem with this Superfund site is that the remedial action, they're going to have a proposed remedial action plan, and there's really no real good treatment. There's really nothing that really can be done. I mean, they have, you could remove all the dirt, but which would be incredibly expensive. I have some experience with this with petroleum product, where they take and incinerate it. So, I mean, this is something we're going to be dealing with this with a long time. So, like I said, I always, when I give a talk, I always say we live on top of our water, and I hope we all keep that in mind. Whatever we put in the ground ends up in our water. We're going to be stuck with this thing for many years. Thank you.
Hi, Dave McMorris, Hampton Bays. Ray just touched on a large part of my question and my concern about the PFOS, PFAS contaminants, as well as other emerging contaminants that we may not even know about. They are forever chemicals. They don't break down, or they take a very long time to break down. They're carcinogenic. They do cause cancer. I wanted to get clarification on well number 1 over here on Ponquag Avenue, which is right across the street from the firehouse. And also the PFOS compounds are not just in the firefighting foam. They're in a lot of household products that we've been using for decades, like Stainmaster carpet and couches and Scotchgard, thank you. Teflon frying pans, exactly. So it's not just, the press tends to say firefighting foam. It's maybe the largest cause of it, but there's a lot of stuff that we all have in our own homes or have had that contribute to this. Well number 1 over on Ponquag Avenue, I just wanted to get clarification. The GAC filtration, which is responsible for removing the PFOS and PFAS chemicals, is the capital expense recommendation for an exterior building because that GAC filtration is not capable of running during the cold winter months, and that's why that building is required. So therefore, that GAC filtration is not currently taking out those chemicals?
The facility is shut down in the winter, and the filter is drained down to prevent it from freezing. So the water, there's not contaminated water going into the system. They're just not operating those wells.
So we still have the PFOS and PFAS filtration all 12 months currently, or we don't?
No, the facility's not operating in the winter. They turn it off.
Okay, so if I'm a recipient of water that comes from that well,
You would get water from another well
okay,
instead.
that's what I wanted to hear. All right, thank you.
Hi, my name's Bob Tyson, live in Hampton Bays. I have a couple of comments, and then I have a question, if I may. Comment is that I wanted to thank the town board and their capacity as commissioners for taking care of this and sort of letting the town know what is necessary. I agree that the Suffolk County Water Authority now knows what they're negotiating for
okay? And hopefully, this is certainly more than their original offer, what is necessary for capital improvement. The other thing is that the rates, as they are shown, perhaps might motivate folk in the town to be more conservation-minded in their water use, okay? If the cost of water is going to double, et cetera, perhaps people will be a little bit more careful in how much they use, might mitigate the need for additional wells in the future based on the amount of water that we use. The last question I wanted to ask, okay, had to do with the gentleman who said, why don't we borrow the $35 million now? And that made an awful lot of sense to me, okay? And I don't know if the town is in a position to borrow the $35 million, say, hey, we need $10 million in the first 2 years, and then in the first 5 years, we need $20 million. Is it against, and I don't know who the question should go to, can the town do that and then reinvest that money that we don't need for another 5 years in an instrument to offset the 1.5% interest that we're going to be paying on the entire amount?
That's a complicated question. It's actually, there's a lot of rules that regard to municipal borrowing. Many, as you know, we can probably invest the money, you're right, and if we pay a lower interest rate because we issue actually tax-free municipal bonds, so there's no taxes. If you earn the interest on those bonds, you don't have to pay income tax on it. So we actually, people will pay more for that, so that our rate is lower. However, when you do that, we are limited to the amount of interest that we can make because there's what's called arbitrage. You're not allowed to make money on borrowing money. And there's IRS regulations regarding that. And they changed a lot of rules with regard to how municipalities can borrow. The other thing is when you borrow money, the payback period starts immediately, and you have to spend the money with in regard to with New York State finance laws within a certain period of time. Now, if we were to do it within 5 years, I think that probably would work. But if you were going to say we were going to borrow today, and it would need to go, we're spending money 10 years out, I don't think so. I think, from my recollection, I think within a 5-year period of time, we would have to spend all of the proceeds. So it is complicated on a lot of different levels, but it is a good time to borrow. I think that's not lost on us. We've been borrowing money on other projects in the town now, front-loading, because we're able to lock in large sums at lower rates.
Then why put this on a 10-year plan then? Why don't you do it on a 5-year plan?
Most of the borrowing is front-loaded.
Well, yeah, a lot of this borrowing,
We'll take advantage of the low interest rate at the moment.
I think if you see here, like a bunch, like through 23, I think we said actually the first 5 years was like 25 million of the 35 million. So, yeah, that could be a decision that the town board makes, that we're going to borrow all 25 million, get the 5 years out of the way, and then we'll see where we are in 5 years. Maybe the market's lower, maybe it's the same, maybe it's not, but get the first chunk handled right away. That's a decision, a financial decision the board has to make.
Richard Ruffner, Hampton Bays. 2 questions. First, what percentage of the residents in Hampton Bays are on town water versus their own private wells? Do we know that?
I don't know that.
There's very few on private wells, I think maybe 12, about 12 customers, or no, they wouldn't be customers, they wouldn't be.
12 customers or 12%?
There's 12 private wells, we think. There might be some people who are using private wells for irrigation, but for water, I think there's only about, maybe less than 12.
12 people?
People, yeah.
Well, I think it's a lot more than that in Hampton Bays using wells.
Creek is probably your biggest, that area is probably all wells.
That's outside the water district, though. Do you want, James, you want to handle this?
It's in Hampton Bays, but it's outside the district.
It's outside the water district. You want to come on up, James?
Aren't the same.
I think there's definitely, I mean, I know of 20 people at least in Hampton Bays that still have wells.
The boundaries of Hampton Bays is not the same as the boundaries of the Hampton Bays Water District.
Irrespective of that, if there's a problem in Hampton Bays with the water, all the residents should be protected or safeguarded in some capacity. And that's my second part of the question is, if this problem we have now with these pollutants and everything, what are we doing to advise or test wells for people that are drinking this water, privately? Is there a plan of action to address that?
When the contaminants were found in well field 1 here, we actually did a pilot study. I think Zeb was a company that came out and they asked us what known customers down gradient, because the water runs from north to south here, where is in our aquifer, what customers are on wells, and there is no customers that were down gradient from us that would have gotten affected from their private well that they were using for their drinking water.
Now, how far down does that go? Does it go down to King Street, or is it much before
All
that?
to the end of our district. And it's and also it's on the customer themselves to test their well water if they're still on it. We don't test the water for them. They basically take a sample themselves, send it off to the lab, and then they get the results from that. But we had to provide the Board of Health and the DEC with any known customer or resident of Hampton Bays that we knew that was down gradient from the firehouse, basically running down to basically Dune Road.
And how wide would that go?
As wide as our district. It basically, according to our SWAP model, which shows how the potable water runs underneath us, we had to follow basically that path from where it starts at the firehouse and how it runs going basically southeast. Anybody in that vicinity is what we had to provide.
And then the second question is there a plume situation we're going to have here and be dealing with for the next 5, 10, 20 years like they have in Bethpage, or?
Well, there's no way to foresee that. The best way to do that is our testing, and also our surroundings. What the gentleman here did at the 2-mile radius around each well is basically going to be our best tell of anything forthcoming. Like I know Suffolk County, a lot of districts around us are experiencing 1,4-dioxane, which is a big problem that water districts are encountering, and it's a steep number to try to take care of. But knowing our geography of Hampton Bays and what was here, and basically our testing, our aggressive testing that we do, we'll be able to see anything that's forthcoming, whether any emerging contaminant that we don't test for, anything that we do test for, we'll be able to show up.
I'll just add one thing to that. The DEC is investigating that site. So they have monitoring wells, they're collecting data. You could go to their website, it's a registered Superfund site, and you could see all the information they have.
All on Hampton Bays here.
On that specific site, on
Right.
that Superfund site. Any information that's available about a plume that's emanating from there, if there is any information available, that's where you'd find it.
That's where you'd find it.
Yeah.
Will there be a remediation facility or some kind of a program to take that?
It'll all be in that website.
No, I'm talking about over here at the firehouse.
Yes, but go look at that DEC website.
Do you know what the answer is?
I don't know offhand, no.
Do you know what the
It's
answer
still
is?
under investigation. It's still an ongoing investigation, exactly what the fire district's going to have to do, what they're going to implement them or suggest or have them do to clean out the water.
So that problem is still continuing?
Right.
Hasn't been addressed?
Yeah, we continuously test. The numbers have dropped off from what they have been. So the numbers were really high when we first got the filters put in, but right now they're on the downward path. Who knows if that'll ever jump back up, but that's going to be on the fire district to handle. That's nothing to do with the water district.
Can I add something there too? So, we understand that the water table moves. It's not a static thing. So water flows. It'll eventually get to the bays and harbors. So with the firehouse as a known contaminated site, we know the direction that water flows. If you know of individuals who are on private wells, and we had asked the health department to help us identify anyone in the water district, that because they know who their customers are. As Mr. D'Angelo said, these are highly toxic chemicals, and that water needs to be tested. The town board established a program in East Quogue where we literally paid for people to connect to public water. And I imagine we would do the same thing here in Hampton Bays. So if we know that people have private wells in a contaminated area, the board can discuss it. I can't speak for the whole board, but I would say that there's a likelihood that we will help those people connect to public water, free of charge.
Hi, my name is John Maloney, Hampton Bays resident, 55 years. So I've been here a while. And while James is talking about the water district issues, he's also a volunteer fireman. I spent 21 years there. And I'm really flabbergasted that we've got this issue because being a fireman, I went to every fire. How many fires did we use foam? Maybe 6 a year? Maybe? James, do we put foam in the trucks anymore? How many years ago did we stop?
Since we sold 6 by 12, 15 years.
It's for basically gasoline fires, oil-based fires. Typically use water to put out a house fire.
Really, that foam, if it's a wet water or something, brush trucks sit on it mostly, that can stay in the truck, not that firefighting foam.
Correct. We had one truck in the Hampton Bays Fire Department, it was 756, that held a 5-gallon can of this chemical, of which we very rarely used. We never had a plane fire. We very rarely used it on a vehicle fire. We didn't train in the back of the firehouse. So where did all this stuff come from? I don't remember it at all. And going back to a few other things, when we first came out here, my family came out for 3 reasons. Fishing was number 1, the beaches were number 2, and the water was number 3. We couldn't believe water could taste this great. And we were from East Meadow. So I remember after we bought our house on Lynn Avenue, the well goes in the house. We had a well right in our basement. Knowing what I know now, I should be glowing in the dark because not only was our cesspool within 10 feet of the foundation without a septic tank, we had termites. And they poured chlordane around the outside of the house every year. And we were drinking from a well that was only 12 feet deep. How did we live? Obviously, we've made tons of mistakes. We're getting smarter and smarter as we go. I won't point out anybody, but we all know a bunch of people that had old gas and just dumped it in the ground. All their oil, when they changed their oil, went in the ground. That's where it went. Nobody knew any better. We now know that's not good. So we have to make a lot of changes. One of the things that I see in this report, and I'm glad that everybody's here to let's get it done, but we had a period of non-maintenance, so now we're catching up. So we have to catch up, and it's a must. But the one thing I do know is Hampton Bays, we lost our lighthouse, we lost Hercules. The only thing we own is our water. And I would hate for anybody to vote to watch this go. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Pat Katari from Hampton Bays. My whole thing is we borrow all the money now and we fix it now. 5 years, get it done. There's no reason why we can't make it as cheap as possible and do the right thing. You got a leak in your roof, you're going to fix it, you're going to do the whole roof. Why are we going to just piece it out? It's going to cost us more money in the long run. So let's look at the long haul and do it now, because it'll be cheaper for us now. And I'll use the firehouse. The firehouse cost us $3.2 million or 3.5, what was it, to build it? Yeah. And if we would have built it now, it would probably cost us maybe $4 million. So I'm saying fix it now, save the 2.5% we're going to get it at. I say borrow the money, fix it all right now, and get it done. Thank you.
I know $34 million does sound like a lot of money. You know, across the island they're facing 1,4-dioxane, which is really expensive to remove. Hampton Bays doesn't have that problem. The water mains, they seem, we looked at that, we didn't think any water mains needed to be replaced over the next 10 years. Water main replacement could be very expensive, so 34 million is a lot of money. It could have been 100 million, it's not. So it's, it's cost millions of dollars to operate a system like this. And whether we do it all in the first year or whether you spread it out, I think that's a financial decision the town has to grapple with. But I respect your position, try to get it done faster than slower. So, all right, anyone else? Yeah.
One more quick question, sorry. Doreen Bartoldes, I spoke earlier, just to give my name out there. Once we put these facilities, what is the plan for operating them? Are we adding more employees? Are we certified operators? That kind of thing.
Did you address that in the report?
The only thing we're adding is an iron plant as far as facilities, and the existing operators will get trained by the engineering firm. I assume that's in the contract.
He just brought up the fact that this might have been bad maintenance, so I'm just wondering if we need more people to maintain the facilities. That's all.
We did do an analysis in the report of the need for staff. So I think the staff they have is adequate. The question of whether or not they should be doing more maintenance, I think is really for them to determine.
The numbers that the controller looked at and they're in the report, there are some additional funds for cleaning the iron filtration and things like that, for the additional testing that we're doing, for where every well ought to be, the wellhead should be cleaned every 7 years or so. We weren't doing that. We are doing that now. We did that at one of the well fields, Field 4, I think, recently, last year. So, on the maintenance side, I don't expect the maintenance costs to go up with all this capital project. It's mostly replacement of things that they have, resurfacing of tanks and, additional water mains and things like that, but not it shouldn't be high. I think the operational costs went up by $300,000 a year. I think that was the number that was put into the report.
These recommendations are capital improvement recommendations. That, the tanks, like a great example, you're going to have to do that every 15 to 20 years. It's not a lack of maintenance, it's just the passage of time. And most of these projects are not, I can't think of really any of them that are due to neglect. It's just a natural evolution of operating a system like this. There are other operations type projects, like Jay just mentioned, the well maintenance. That's not on the capital improvements because it's not really a capital project, it's a maintenance project.
Well, I think I saw you had like 8 people.
There's not going to be any additional staff. I don't think that's part, the staff is adequate. And, we did look at different ways to handle pH balancing, and some are more labor intensive, but the choice was to stay with the caustic soda approach, is the way we do that now. So we did look at some things that may have led to additional staffing, but ultimately the recommendations were that the current staffing levels are appropriate. Did you have a question?
My name is Heather Evans, and I live on Ocean View Road. I'm east of the canal, and I've been there little over 22 years. 4 years ago, we went from our private well to public water. First year was great. Last 2.5 years, it's not low pressure, it's no water for about 5 months out of a year, from 2 a.m. till 7 a.m. And it's very frustrating, and when the water does come on, the pipes are full of air and the water's rusty. But my question is, isn't there a solution for I understand it's a small group east of the canal. Isn't there a solution that can be found east of the canal rather than west of the canal?
We did evaluate those types of alternatives. We looked at the water main, an additional water main, which is the thing we're recommending. But we also looked at, could you put another well over there? Could you put a storage tank with a booster pump? And those things, while they would be feasible, they're difficult because you don't have a site. The district doesn't own a site. So this solution is actually faster And it's actually better because it provides redundancy as well as solving the pressure problem.
That just brings to mind, though, another question that someone else brought up. Perhaps Suffolk County Water Authority would be a solution if it's a territorial issue.
You're saying just for east of the canal?
Yeah. Is that something that's possible?
There are interconnections over there, it's possible. I don't know that, as was said earlier, the pressure at the interconnects, so the question was, could Suffolk County Water Authority just take east of the canal because they have the interconnection there? But it was also stated earlier that the pressure on the Suffolk County water side is less than on the Hampton Bays side. They don't have adequate pressure either.
I don't mind the pressure, though, I just want some water.
Well, it's related. Without pressure, you have no water. But I will say this, because we are your managers, that is an unacceptable level of service. If you can't take a shower or flush a toilet from 2 in the morning to 7 a.m., every customer is equally valued. We have to fix that. That is completely unacceptable. Where we are your water utility, and that's no way to live. So we have to fix that problem. That's, critical.
I'm not going to just say, oh, well, it's Tuesday and they're watering lawns. It's just not. And it's only been for the last 2.5
That's no way to live. So that's a problem we have to address.
With the interconnect with Suffolk County Water District, last year, when we had the biggest problem with the low pressure in your neck of the woods over there, we opened up that interconnect and shut our system off, so you guys were supplied with Suffolk County water. That's when we experienced our highest volume of low pressure and no water calls, was when we turned on those guys. I did a little, just a quick little math before I got here today, because I know that the subject, especially east of the canal, is going to come up with low pressure. Yeah, no water, and I know it's terrible, and it's, you're not the only place in town. I have the same problem, and I live in the middle of town, and I'm the superintendent now. So, yeah, it's not good at all. But what we really do have to focus here, the water district can put another 100 wells in and give you 1 million gallons of water, but everybody here in this room right now, and it should start with tonight, has to understand that there's only so much water under the ground, all right? And if we're starting to pull salt water, people, that means that we're using too much water, okay? An average sprinkler system around this place in a zone is good for 11 gallons a minute, okay, per zone. That's 6 sprinkler heads, okay? There's 200 sprinkler systems on the other side of the canal coming on from 2 o'clock in the morning till 5 o'clock in the morning. Is it more important to take a shower and be clean and have something to drink, or our grasses be green? There's a line that we're all going to have to make here, and where the Suffolk County Water District comes in, they're pulling 1,4-dioxane out of the ground, okay, which is something that it's all due to everybody's just gross misuse of a natural resource that needs to be monitored better. And I think honestly that in my opinion, being at the Water District for 32 years, the pressure problems is, it goes hand in hand with the demand on the system. We have more people out here, the whole 9 yards. But honestly, at this time of the year, I don't know how your water pressure problems are right now. Fine, because there's no irrigation systems being used.
So that's
and that's
why I have a conceptual picture of the sprinklers are on at 2 in the morning.
Yes, that's exactly what the problem is, and honestly, we've had the idea of running the second main to have some redundancy over there, but if you think about it, and I'm using conservative numbers on irrigation systems. I mean, how many people in this room have an irrigation system? Yeah, nobody wants to raise their hand. Okay. All right, there's a couple of 100 gallons a minute just went out the door. A lot of these pumps that we have are only rated to pump 500 gallons a minute, okay? One pump just got used with everybody that raised their hand here. We have 10 left now. You follow me? Okay, so people have to make that choice, And if you see people using water and watering all night long and you can't take a shower, maybe it's time you say, hey, we'll go to odd even watering days and we can all pitch in. You know, it's something that,
I'd just add, the recommended improvement will solve the problem.
there are, but, you know, again, I could say you could keep putting wells in, but eventually the ground's gonna go dry.
Yeah, so I do want to get back, it's Gail Lombardi. Gail, I do want to get back on the record to follow up with Richie. Many of us here in Hampton Bays have voiced concerns about the overlay district being overdeveloped with, 248 apartments and, all this additional density. And it's exactly Richie's point. I mean, we live on our water. We should all conserve. But the town is putting forth a plan to allow the village business zoning to increase the density. And it has been a concern of mine and several of the other residents that we are paying for a well that pretty much is going to service, a small radius, and we're running out of water. So again, I think it's overlapping and we should consider it. Thank you.
Richard and Rick? I promised to wrap by 9 o'clock.
Robert J. That's all right, Jay. Thanks for explaining before about the funding. I understand what you said about, and I think if the financial gentleman maybe will explain, if it's more front-loaded, aren't these numbers going to be totally, irrelevant, and we're going to be paying much more at the front end than we are? Okay, so I understood what you said, and thanks for that answer. What about the CPF funds? I'm looking at your own site. Drinking water is included in your verbiage, as is contaminants in the water. So we're talking about, those issues. The other thing, I'm sorry to ask you to repeat it, Jay, but you discussed briefly about receiving grant money. Can you say again what realistically we could expect? I don't know what you said, I missed that little part. Is it the county or the state that might provide grant money? Is that feasible or is that not realistic? And what number are we looking at? Are they contributing $10, $10,000, $1 million? But also the CPF. It seems it's part of the language of what CPF funds are designated for.
Right, so let me answer just the CPF piece. So the Community Preservation Fund was amended. This is the transfer tax on real property. It generates $40 to $50 million a year. We use it to buy land. We use it to fix historic buildings like the Tiana Life Saving Station or the Liaison Hat Shop. We used it to build parks or to buy parks like Good Ground Park and things like that. It was amended to allow us to do water quality projects. It could be the grants that we're providing for people to change their septic systems to new systems that remove nitrogen. It's a very restricted law. There's certain things it can't do. It can be used to address some of these emerging contaminants, so people who are on private wells and need to hook up to public water. So, what I mentioned before, I thought the town board would be inclined to help those people connect. It would be using those community preservation fund revenues because that would be an eligible type of project. You could not use it, let's say, to build an additional water main over to east of the canal. That's not something you could legally do, or to directionally drill to Dune Road. That wouldn't, regular water infrastructure is not something covered under that program. In terms of what grants you could turn to, Bill, what did I lose Bill to? But Bill, oh, there you are, right there. I'm sorry, my eyesight. Bill may know more, having experience with other water districts. He's an expert in this area. The state did make money available. We just applied for quite a bit of money for the iron and manganese filtration, and we did not get that. I'm not sure that we had finalized all that paperwork, but we're going to go in for a new round on that iron and manganese filtration and try to get some state water quality money. What other sources of money are out there? I think Bill can answer better than I.
Really, the primary source of funding has been from the water infrastructure Act, WIIA they call it. It's administered by New York State. And the last couple of years, most of that money has gone for treatment plant projects. Mostly these emerging contaminants, but also for other types of treatment plants. So the iron and manganese plant application has a chance, but it's being somewhat dwarfed out by all of these emerging contaminant problems that are going on all over Long Island. So the state gave away, I think it was $485 million in 2019. And we don't know what's going to happen this next year, but I can tell you there's going to be a lot of applications, and they're all going to be for those emerging contaminants. So there's a lot of competition, and there's a limited amount of funds.
Okay. Ray?
I just got a quick comment. I used to live in Syosset, and we had this problem with low water pressure, and because everybody had a sprinkler system there. And about 12 years ago, they did go to odd and even days watering, and they enforced it, and it really helped the situation. So, and I was just going to say this to the commissioners, maybe they should look at this and enforce, odd and even days with your sprinkler system. That's what I wanted to say.
Great suggestion.
That's actually a Nassau County ordinance, the odd and even.
Yeah, we have at times imposed that. I don't know to what degree, Rich or James, that we've enforced it. We have imposed that. I remember 2 summers ago where we had a real problem. We've asked people if your house number is an odd number, you're on odd days, and if it's an even.
We haven't went out and arrested anybody yet.
Right.
I think we actually have.
But we have the ability to find people, I guess, to do that. Let me thank everybody for coming. I failed to mention one other person. We have a representative from Legislator Bridget Fleming's office here. Vanessa is here. Thank you for attending. I know this is a really important topic to all of you, not just because it's a pocketbook issue with the cost, but we all want to know that it's okay to drink the water, or to boil pasta in the water, or to shower or take a bath in the water. This is, we want you to have that confidence in your water system, and that's why we took on this plan, to know exactly what we have and to know what to expect in the future. I want to thank all of you for attending, but in particular I want to thank Bill Merklin from DeVerco and Bartolucci. I think they did an excellent job on the report and on the presentation. Also, Controller Len Marchese for coming and explaining the impact to each household. Thank you, Len. And let's also thank the board, the commissioners of the Hampton Bay Water District for being open and transparent and providing all this information to you. So, thank you, board. Board, any other business? I'd like to make a motion to adjourn. Seconded by Councilman Bouvier. All in favor? Aye.